Sharper Than a Serpent's Tooth. Written by the Hanged Man 317 and read by Purple Star. Chapter 23. Era stood before the Blackie apartment complex, taking a moment to glance down at the address on her phone before tucking it away in her pocket. She took a breath and felt it sit sturdy in her lungs, chasing away uncertainty with practiced ease. This was necessary. This was sensible. This was good. The fact of the matter was that Era could not continue with her studies in such disarray, especially if she was supposed to be gunning for the hero course. And with Step 4, run Eraserhead into the ground off the table, ever since the USJ revealed the twisting consequences of that action, she had felt swirling relief at her failure, tugging at her stomach, with a confused sort of nausea. Era found herself with a lot more free time. Fortuitous, then, that Midoriya had sent her a text, asking her yet again if she'd like to study with them. It was difficult to tell over text, but Era suspected that he'd been surprised when she actually said yes. Era had murdered crime bosses, had infiltrated high-security organizations, had both laid down covering fire and been in desperate, bloody need of it. So why? Hovering at the threshold of this quiet apartment unit, was she hesitating at the sight of a single door? Not even a metal one, with locks or bars or reinforced hinges. No, by the look of the simple handle and the white paint that chipped and flecked off around the edges, she was sure that she could get this thing open without so much as a hangnail. It wasn't the door, though, was it? It was never just the door. What lay behind, that was where the true terror lurked. Rapping against the plane wood with her knuckles, Era fought to ignore the twisting feeling that weaved in serpentine coils through her ribcage, squeezing ever so slightly when she heard the soft patter of footsteps from within the apartment.
I shouldn't be here.
The door flew open, and Era bit down a yelp of surprise when she was greeted by a mop of green hair and a blinding smile.
Hey, Era! Thanks for coming! I know you're probably really busy, but I'm glad you could—
Thanks for inviting me. Era stepped around him and into the apartment, slipping off her shoes and sliding into a couple of guest slippers, ignoring how her steps felt clumsy and weighed down by the slightly oversized fabric. Sorry I'm late.
Oh, that's no problem. Not that you're late, really. I mean, we haven't even started yet. Not that we were waiting on you or anything. It wasn't an issue. Oh, but not that we wouldn't wait, or that it would be an issue if we had to.
Era felt the beginnings of a headache press against her temples. Is everyone here, then?
Oh, sorry. I guess
Midoriya ran a sheepish hand through his hair, further tangling the mess of green curls.
I have a bad habit of rambling. Sorry, I know it's a little...
It's fine. You don't have to apologize. Era tried to imagine what her life might have been like if she'd grown up with such a habit, then quickly dismissed it. Her teachers would never have allowed for such a potential weakness, not to mention the possibility of it being seen as disrespectful.
Do not speak unless spoken to.
It would have been beaten out of her with vicious immediacy.
Anyway,
Midoriya soldiered on with a smile as he led her through the apartment.
Everyone's in the living room. I think we're probably going to start on math and then maybe go into history if that's okay. Oh, I also invited a couple of other people. I hope you don't mind.
It's your house. This time, Era couldn't conceal the bemusement in her voice. Whoever you invite is fine.
Okay. I'm just making sure, because I know you don't know a lot of people in the hero course and you haven't really been coming to lunch. Not that you have to, but maybe you know him anyway? He kind of just joined, so he wasn't around when you were around. He's really nice, I promise. But I feel like sometimes it can take a while to get to know him. It's just he's kind of new, you know? And I feel like if he's going to be in our class, it would be nice to help him to get to know some people and get settled in and all that stuff.
Midoriya was speaking softly now, and Era could hear over his murmuring the sound of other voices drifting through an opening in the hallway. She picked out Uradaka's bubbling exclamations, the sharp rhythm of Ida, and even a few croaks from Asui. Someone said something funny, and a burst of laughter echoed into the hall.
Not for me.
Era didn't know where the thought came from. Perhaps it had always been there, curled up in a cobwebbed corner of her mind, slinking through the gaps between her bones and breaths and suffering. In the moments of blissful quiet before the storm swept her up once again, always waiting and watching, and all the while crooning sweet poison into her ear.
Not for me.
It wasn't his voice. Not this time. It was something else. A twisted reflection of her own that sneered at her from the other side of a mirror.
Not for me. Never for me.
It was warm here, and soft. Era's calloused feet caught on the soft fabric of her slippers, while her hands twitched for something, anything, to defend herself. The faint scent of someone's cooking twitched at her nose, and she immediately strained to detect any acrid notes of poison.
Not for me.
She'd paused in the hall, and Midoriya turned back to shoot her a puzzled glance.
Hey, are you okay?
Before she could pull herself together enough for an answer, another burst of laughter swelled into the hallway, accompanied by a low voice that shook her from the tangled webs of thoughts she'd fallen into. Era brushed past Midoriya and into the living room, ignoring the way that several raised eyes burned into her flesh.
Shinsou? Era, what are you doing here?
His tone wasn't aggressive, but Era felt herself shift into something more defensive anyway.
I was invited. I assume you were as well?
She said stiffly, suddenly finding herself with a whole different influx of emotions to handle. More uncomfortable memories rising to the surface, with a clarity lent to them by how recent they were. Shinsou just snorted.
Dragged here against my will, more like. What, you finally gave up studying alone? Acknowledging that your dumb jock brain can't handle things more complicated than linear equation?
There was a strange sort of tension in the room. An uncomfortable silence that Era easily dismissed with a grin and a scoff.
Oh, buddy, you look a little out of breath there. Take it easy. You wouldn't want to strain yourself. I feel like the stairs up here was probably your workout for the week, right?
He smiled.
Ass. Nice to see you're alive. Likewise to you and those bony little twigs you call arms. A little much. Just making up for lost time.
The tension had dissipated, Uradaka lifting a hand to her mouth to stifle a giggle.
You two knew each other then?
Era turned to see Midoriya entering the living room, and found herself fascinated by the ebb and flow of anxiety across his face.
Oh, I guess that makes sense because you were both probably in general studies together. Sorry, I should have remembered. Though obviously not everyone in Gen Ed knows each other, that's not... but it's good that you two know each other. I just forgot that Shinsou used to be in another class. I mean, he was only in full Gen Ed classes for like a day, but I guess that he's still taking some of them?
Midoriya, I don't understand how you do that without passing out,
said Shinsou, and Era nodded in agreement.
Your lung capacity must be incredible. Have you considered testing it?
Era hummed in thought.
UA has a pool, right? Are you suggesting we drown Midoriya?
Asked Shinsou with a snort.
What? No, I was just saying that because it really sounds like, continued Shinsou, you're suggesting we take Midoriya, throw him in the UA pool, and see how long it takes him to drown.
Era sighed, rubbing at her temples.
I wasn't, but the more you talk, the more tempting it sounds. Maybe we should all do it. Would you like to be the first volunteer? Is this a threat? Are you threatening me? I'm just expressing a scientific curiosity.
So, you two are really good friends then?
Cut in Uraraka. Era paused, glancing at Shinsou. That was the million-dollar question, wasn't it? They'd never talked. They'd apologized to each other, yes, but that moment was perhaps overshadowed by the life-threatening chaotic mess that was the USJ. If Era was being completely honest, Shinsou's quirk still made her uncomfortable in a way that left her a little sick. Too familiar, and yet unfamiliar enough that she felt guilt worm itself beneath her flesh. And there was the matter of what he knew, who he thought it was acceptable to share that knowledge with. Dangerous. Dangerous. But the more distance she put between herself and that argument, the more she felt a little bit ridiculous. She was very practiced at reading a lie, and she already knew Shinsou's tells from months of study and spars. He hadn't been lying. But then there was the matter of her own forgiveness, her own failings that led him to hate her so thoroughly. Era's great at pushing people away, she knew, adept at driving a serrated edge between herself and others until her name was glass on their tongues. She'd thought that this bridge had been burned into an ashen crisp. And yet, here he was grinning at her from across the living room. It was guarded, a little unsure, and perhaps sharper than she was used to, but still. Era wasn't practiced at being forgiven, but she could damn well wear a mask until she figured it out. Friends? I've never met this boy in my life, said Era, prying another snort of laughter from Shinsou. All those months of helping you out, and this is the thanks that I get? Do you know how many binders I had to put together? Curse you and your 3-ringed binders. I hope I never see a 3-ringed binder ever again in my entire life. Next to Shinsou, Era saw Ida nudge something that looked suspiciously like a 3-ringed binder beneath the couch. She allowed herself a grin and dropped her bag onto the floor, sitting next to it. Aren't we supposed to be studying or something? They settled into a comfortable routine, pulling out notes and textbooks before poring over old work. None of them were better teachers than Shinsou had been, really. Midoriya had a tendency to ramble on into other topics, leading her along tangents, until she found herself dizzy at his winding train of thought. Ida had a very particular way of thinking and, like Shinsou, found it difficult to explain topics differently from how he understood them. Uraraka was cheerful as always, but it seemed that she was struggling a little in class too, and she sometimes found herself getting confused in the midst of her own explanations. Out of all of them, Asui was probably the most adept teacher. She was blunt and driven, determined to ensure that the others understood the fundamentals before moving on to the next topic, no matter how long it took. They all balanced each other well. Asui kept Midoriya's rambling in check, while Uraraka made sure that Ida and Shinsou didn't get too caught up in their own heads, often able to translate for them when communication became difficult. It seemed she was naturally very empathetic, keen to understand others. Meanwhile, Midoriya was constantly checking in with Uraraka to make sure she wasn't lost and just too embarrassed to say anything about it. And though she did seem to get a little flustered the first few times he did it, Era could tell that she was thankful. Ida taught some more complicated math concepts to Midoriya, who in turn gave them all a helpful info dump on quirk law and history. Shinsou and Asui were jacks of all trades who could easily fill in the gaps, and both of them were quick to pull the others back down to earth when conversation inevitably veered off topic. In fact, Era felt as if she were the only person who wasn't contributing a single goddamn thing. Again, That crooning voice whispered at the back of her skull.
Not for you. Era, you fucked up this problem like 4 times in a row. Are you good?
Shinsou waved a worksheet in her face, snapping her from that brief daze. Across the room, Ida began to lift a hand.
Shinsou! That kind of language is...
I don't need a lecture. Seriously, Era, what's wrong with you? It's the same mistake every time.
Snatching the paper from him, Era looked down at the problem with a sigh, and smoothed out the wrinkle that threatened at her brow.
Sorry. I'll fix it.
Something smacked her softly on the head, and she repressed a wince, forcing herself to relax as an empty can cluttered to the floor next to her.
Dude, what is up with you? I know you suck at math, but this is ridiculous.
I don't...
Era cut herself off with a clack of her teeth, instead focusing on the scrawled writing in her hands. Was this really the same problem as before? She could have sworn it had been different, that the numbers had been swapped or flipped or something. A trembling swept into her arms, before she managed to shake it away, narrowing her eyes down at the page in an attempt to force the numbers into stillness. It didn't work. In fact, now they seemed to swim off the page, taunting her with her own inadequacy.
This was unacceptable. She was Era. She was Kotori. She was...
You aren't broken, little bird.
No, this wasn't what they'd meant. Yes, she was broken. Yes, she needed to be fixed, but this was... She wasn't stupid. She wasn't an idiot. That hadn't somehow been broken too. She didn't need to be fixed in order to do something this simple. She should be able to. She could do it. She wasn't broken. She didn't need to be fixed. She didn't need the room and the dark and the table, and this wasn't a part of that weakness they'd been stamping out. Yet another part of her that could be corrected if she just let them fix her. Right? Right? Era only realized she'd been staring down at the page for far too long, when Asui gently pulled it from her grasp.
It looks like you swapped a couple numbers around, Get up. Don't worry, I do that all the time. Here.
Placing the worksheet on the table, Asui leaned over to dig through her bag, and emerged with a sheet of what looked like graph paper.
If you want, you could try doing the work on this. It could help the numbers line up better.
Era was doubtful, but she still accepted the proffered graph paper and set to work for the 5th time. Useless. Absolutely fucking useless. And now Asui had decided to waste an entire piece of graph paper on her. Something she obviously needed for another class or something if she was carrying it around in her backpack. Gritting her teeth, Era tried to focus through the swarm of thoughts that buzzed in her ears. Fuck. She really was the weakest link here. Everyone else could do these kinds of problems. Why was she so incompetent? Why couldn't she? Another can whisked through the air, and this time Era's hand snapped up to grab it before it could hit her. She looked up to see Shinsou staring back at her, the concern on his face warring with surprise.
Whoa, he said. I gotta say, that was kind of impressive.
Yeah, Era! That was really cool! How did you do that?
Uraraka stared at her with wide eyes that burned and itched at Era's skin as she let the can fall to the floor.
I don't know,
she said with a shrug, resolutely staring back down at the worksheet.
Lucky, I guess. Was there something you wanted? I mean, yeah, but can we just talk about that reaction time for a moment?
Shinsou leaned forward, eyes narrowing.
I don't think I've ever seen you move that fast, even when we were sparring. What, you've been going easy on me?
Era snorted, not willing to dignify that with a response.
Of fucking course she'd been going easy on him. If she hadn't, he would have been dead on day 1.
Oh, you two spar? That makes sense.
Asui pressed a finger to her chin,
Do you both want to get into the hero course then?
Era's jaw tensed, but again she didn't answer. Shinsou had created this fucking mess, so he damn well better clean it up.
We trained together for the entrance exam,
he said simply, and Era could detect just a hint of bitterness beneath his customary apathy.
Obviously that didn't go quite as planned.
Asui tilted her head to the side.
That wasn't an answer. You both still want to get in?
I do,
said Shinsou, and though Era didn't miss that barb thrown her way, she chose to ignore it.
I'm already halfway there. As long as I can impress the teachers, I can probably move up officially after the sports festival.
Midoriya glanced over curiously.
Is that why Aizawa-sensei is?
Yes,
interrupted Shinsou rather shortly, and for a moment Era wondered what the hell Midoriya had been about to say, before she remembered that this was, in fact, the 5th time she'd been doing this problem, and she really didn't want to make it a 6th.
How do you even? You know what? Never mind.
Oh, sorry. I didn't realize that it was supposed to be. I mean, I thought it was kind of obvious, but I guess it was. That is.
Please stop talking.
Right.
Aw, no fair!
Whined Uraraka, sinking down into the couch, apparently having given up on her study guide long ago.
I want to know!
Too bad.
Shinsou returned to his own worksheet, frowning down at the problems.
I guess some things will just have to remain a mystery. To most people, anyway.
Sorry again,
If you're really sorry, Midoriya, then you'll stop talking about it.
Midoriya flushed, shoulders bunching up around his ears.
Sir, okay.
With a sigh, Shinsou let his worksheet fall to the table.
I don't understand you. How can you be so perceptive and yet so dense?
It's a compliment, muttered Era, as she scratched away at the problem. Asui was right. The graph paper was a help, albeit a small one. And before you ask, yes, they're rare, and yes, they're always like that.
Oh, says you.
Excuse you? Era didn't glance up, moving on to the next step. She could do this. She could fucking do this. My compliments are great.
Whenever I did anything right, you decided to show it by slamming me into the ground.
You were still conscious, Era pointed out absently. That's how you know I care. Shinsou huffed.
The bruises would suggest otherwise. You done with that yet?
Almost. Just checking my work.
Did you not do that the first 4 times?
He was just joking around, throwing out another barb. Another barb in the constant sparring match they seemed to be dancing around. But this time, instead of making Era grin with adrenaline-spiked anticipation, it just left her feeling worn and wrung out.
I'm just making sure the fucking numbers didn't change again, okay?
She snapped, feeling her frustration seep between her teeth and desperately trying to gather it all up again. To squeeze it nice and tight so she could put it in a box. But it kept slipping through her fingers. I'm trying my best, I just can't. Nothing's sticking. I can't remember any of this. She forced back a snarl, instead letting herself grip the pencil a little tighter. Silence. Again. Again, the fucking silence because of her. Because she didn't fit right, because she was broken, and she wouldn't let them fix her, because this wasn't for her, none of it was too good for her, and she fucking knew it, so why couldn't she just...
Breathe.
I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that. Shinsou looked back at her, and though he was betrayed by the slight widening of his eyes, he hid his dawning horror rather well.
No, I shouldn't have.
She cut Shinsou off, unwilling to listen to another stammering apology, drenched with pity that she
didn't need or deserve. It's fine. I'm not made of glass. I can take it. I'm just frustrated, angry, scared, miserable, lonely, tired. A hand laid itself on her arm, and she resisted the urge to jerk away.
Era, did you just say the numbers were changing?
Asked Asui. Fuck, were they really going to spend time dissecting this weakness in front of everyone? Era gave an easy laugh, shrugging off the hand as she did. I'm just exaggerating. That would be stupid, right? It's nothing. I'm just kind of bad at math, you know? And history, and law, and science, and...
That wouldn't be stupid. Get up. One of my younger brother's friends has a problem like that. He used to have a lot of issues in school, but ever since they figured it out, they started teaching him differently, and things got better.
No, it's not... Era wasn't a child. She didn't need any special treatment. She'd never had this problem before. Not until after the dark. Look, I said it's fine. I'm figuring it out, see? Era held up the completed worksheet, handing it over to Shinsou and sounding far more confident than she felt. It's right this time.
Yeah, but if you feel like you're having trouble reading things, then it doesn't hurt to get some help,
said Asui, as Shinsou looked the paper over.
UA is one of the top schools in this country,
added Ida.
I'm sure they'd be able to provide you with the proper tools for your success.
I don't need...
Your homeroom teacher is Yamada-sensei, right?
asked Midoriya, not even waiting for the answer as he barreled forward.
He's really nice. I'm sure if you asked him about it, he could set something up.
This isn't...
Besides,
Uraraka grinned around the others.
We can keep helping you out if you need it. There are probably tons of ways you could learn. And we can definitely figure out the best way to help you study.
I don't need any help. They all stilled, turning to stare at her. Era breathed, schooling her burgeoning snarl into something a little more acceptable. Before she could speak, Shinsou looked up from the worksheet. Era? What? His face twisted into something unreadable as he flipped the sheet around. It's wrong. Fuck. That's fine. I'll just do it again. She reached out to grab the worksheet, but Shinsou didn't move to hand it to her. In fact, he drew it further away, as if he was afraid she might lean forward and snatch it from him. Which wasn't an unreasonable assumption, given the ache blossoming behind her eyes, and the scowl etching its way across her face. What are you doing? This is an intervention, said Shinsou simply. You need help. You're joking. Do I look like I'm joking?
Shinsou's right,
said Midoriya hesitantly, shrinking a little when Era's glare turned onto him.
I'm just saying. Maybe if you figured out what's holding you back, you'd be able to understand things a lot better.
Nothing is holding me back. Era ground out between clenched teeth. This is just who I am. I can't change it.
Can you describe what the problem is exactly? Maybe we can figure out some sort of baseline.
Era stared at Ida incredulously. Are they all fucking deaf? There isn't a problem. Era, I'm going to keep this paper until you tell us what's wrong. Shinsou waved the sheet around to punctuate his threat. Era just sighed, pulling out a different worksheet from her backpack and cracking her neck. You know, Shinsou, a threat is only viable when you can make good on it. Otherwise, it's just sad. What are you talking about? You're sitting in a chair with a tall back and armrests up to your elbows. There's nowhere for you to run. If I really wanted that stupid fucking piece of paper, I could just walk over there and take it. Shinsou smirked. I'd like to see you try.
Never let it be said that Era backed down from a challenge. Bracing her arms against the table for just a moment, Era vaulted over the scattered workbooks and pencils towards the armchair where Shinsou sat, ignoring the shouts of surprise from her fellow students. She landed on her feet right in front of the chair and immediately reached forward to snatch his arm by the wrist, using her other hand to pry the worksheet from his fingers. Shinsou spluttered as Era calmly returned to her seat, finally regaining his composure when she settled down.
"That was not," he wheezed, "walking over here. You jumped the entire table."
Era shrugged. It's about sending a message.
"Stop talking like a mob boss. It's not as cool as you think it is."
Uraraka coughed, struggling to keep a grin from her face.
I mean, it was pretty cool.
"Don't encourage her,"
growled Shinsou, still glaring at Era.
"You haven't distracted me. This is still an intervention."
I'll do it right this time.
"What about next time?"
Shinsou was starting to sound as frustrated as Era felt.
"You can't just beat your head against this problem until it's fixed."
Watch me.
You are the worst.
I am aware.
Seriously, Era,
said Midoriya.
If there's a problem, then you should talk about it with a teacher. They'll be able to help.
I don't...
This conversation was going nowhere.
Capitulate. Let them think they've won a small victory, then walk away with your true prize.
Era sighed and put down the pencil. I'll think about it, okay? Midoriya nodded with a smile.
That's all we're asking.
No, it's not,
protested Shinsou.
Yes, it is,
said Ida firmly.
We shouldn't press her on such a sensitive issue.
Sensitive issue. Era could have scoffed, but she knew that wouldn't help her situation. Instead, she returned Midoriya's smile, pleased to see that she could still stretch it across her face rather easily. Thanks. Now could you remind me what the laws are on public quirk use? I forget.
Oh, yeah, of course!
Midoriya launched into yet another rambling explanation, assisted by interjections from Ida and Asui, as well as the occasional excited comment from Uraraka. Era took notes as well as she could, diligently ignoring Shinsou's glare from across the room all the while. In her haze of confusion about forgiveness and anger and the tricky questions of their friendship, Era had forgotten a fundamental fact. Shinsou was, at his core, a hero, and heroes could never mind their own goddamn business, especially when they smelled blood in the water. Era felt her lips press into a thin line. She wouldn't forget again. End of chapter 23.